I never believed in accidents that change history. At least, not until the night my life folded in on itself like a broken map. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm not a soldier, not a scientist, and definitely not a hero. I repair museum lighting systems for a living. Quiet work, predictable work. That night, I was alone in a closed medieval exhibit, adjusting a malfunctioning display around a 14th century astrolabe recently acquired by the museum. The artifact wasn't supposed to be active, valuable only for its craftsmanship and age. But when my wrench slipped and struck its brass ring, the air around me seemed to tighten, as if the room took a sudden breath. The lights went out. Not a power outage, something deeper. The silence pressed against my ears, and the floor vanished beneath my feet. I felt weightless for a heartbeat that stretched too long, then gravity returned violently. I hit frozen ground hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling was gone. Above me stretched a grey sky, heavy with unmoving clouds. Snow dusted my jacket, though moments ago it had been summer. I staggered to my feet, heart pounding, and turned in slow disbelief. The museum was gone. In its place stood a rough stone wall, broken in places, blackened by old fire. Beyond it rose wooden towers and slanted rooftops, smoke curling from chimneys. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang, low, uneven, human. I didn't need a sign to know I wasn't home. I stumbled toward the wall, my boots sinking into mud mixed with ice. A smell hung in the air, wood smoke, iron, decay. As I reached a collapsed gate, voices rose nearby. Men emerged from behind a cart, dressed in wool and leather, carrying spears. Their faces froze when they saw me. One crossed himself. Another whispered a word I didn't understand, but his fear was clear. I raised my hand slowly, trying to show I wasn't a threat. Before I could speak, a horn sounded from the far end of the settlement. Not a warning horn, something heavier. Something final. The men's fear turned into urgency. They shouted at me, grabbed my arm, and pulled me toward the inner streets. I didn't resist. I didn't know where else to go. We ran through narrow paths between wooden houses until we reached a small stone church. Its doors were barred from the inside. As soon as we crossed the threshold, they slammed them shut behind us. Inside, dozens of people huddled together. Women, children, old men clutching tools instead of weapons. Candlelight flickered over carved saints whose faces looked worn with sorrow. Then I heard it. A sound like many feet dragging over frozen earth. Slow. Uneven. Endless. The priest, a thin man with hollow eyes, approached me cautiously. He spoke in broken Latin mixed with an older form of English I could barely follow. Still, I understood enough. "It comes again," he said. "Every winter. The dead do not rest." The doors shook. Through a narrow window, I saw movement beyond the walls. Shapes emerging from the fog, human in outline, wrong in motion. They walked without rhythm, some limping, some crawling, their bodies wrapped in the remains of burial cloths and rusted armor. Empty eyes reflected candlelight with no sign of life behind them. I wanted to tell myself it was hysteria. A reenactment. A nightmare. But nightmares don't smell like rot, and they don't leave claw marks in oak doors. Panic surged through me. I backed away, my mind racing for logic, for answers. The astrolabe. The blackout. This wasn't just another place, it was another time. Somehow, impossibly, I had fallen into the year 1300. And these people believed they were under siege by the dead. A crash echoed as something struck the outer gate. Dust fell from the ceiling. The villagers screamed. Men rushed forward with spears and torches, bracing for impact. I stood frozen, useless, my modern knowledge suddenly fragile. I had no weapons. No training. No way back. Yet as the pounding continued, I felt something shift inside me, not bravery, not courage, but a quiet understanding. If I wanted to survive, denial was no longer an option. Whatever had brought me here had not done so by chance. And whatever was walking outside those walls was very real. As the church doors groaned under the weight of the undead, one thought cut through my fear with terrifying clarity. If I wanted to return to the present, I would first have to survive the past. 2. The first breach came before dawn. The outer gate finally gave way with a sound like splitting bone. Even inside the church, we felt the vibration travel through the stone floor. Screams erupted from the far end of the settlement, followed by a silence that felt worse than noise. The priest whispered prayers under his breath, his hands shaking as he clutched a wooden cross worn smooth by years of fear. I pressed myself against a pillar, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Every instinct told me I was about to die in a century I didn't belong to, killed by something that should not exist. Yet alongside the terror came a strange clarity. Panic would not help me. These people had survived this before. That meant there were rules, patterns. And patterns could be learned. A young man named Thomas, one of the few villagers who spoke something close to modern English, grabbed my sleeve. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. "They fear fire," he said quickly, as if afraid the words themselves might attract attention. "And I am blessed by prayer. But they do not feel pain. Only destruction stops them." That was not comforting. The church doors shook again. Wood splintered near the hinges. From outside came the low, breathless moan I had heard before, multiplied now into a chorus that scraped against my nerves. It wasn't rage or hunger in that sound, just endless persistence. Someone handed me a torch. My hands trembled as I took it. I'd never held a weapon meant for survival before, and yet here I was, relying on flame and belief to keep death at bay. The priest shouted instructions. A small group would move through the rear passage to the bell tower, lighting the warning fire. If the undead breached the church, the survivors were to flee into the woods and scatter. It was a plan built on desperation, not hope. The doors burst inward. They came through slowly at first, as if testing the space. The nearest figure wore the remains of a soldier's coat, the insignia barely visible beneath grime. One arm hung uselessly at his side. His head tilted at an unnatural angle. When he stepped into the light, I saw his face, or what remained of it. The eyes were cloudy, unfocused, yet somehow aware. The villagers surged forward with torches and spears. Fire licked against decayed cloth. The creature did not scream, but it recoiled, stumbling back into others pressing behind it. For a moment, hope flared. Then more followed. They filled the doorway, pushing without thought, bodies piling against bodies. Spears pierced them, sometimes pinning them in place, sometimes snapping under pressure. Fire slowed them, but it did not stop them entirely. I found myself moving without thinking. When one reached for me, fingers stiff and cold, I swung the torch into its chest. Flames caught, spreading quickly. The smell was unbearable. I gagged but didn't stop. I couldn't. Time lost meaning. At some point, the bell tower fire was lit. Smoke curled into the grey sky. The undead began to withdraw, not retreating, but dispersing, as if drawn by something else beyond the walls. The pressure eased. The church stood, scarred but intact. When silence finally returned, it felt unreal. We counted the living. Too many were gone. As the villagers tended to the wounded, I collapsed against the wall, exhausted beyond words. My hands were blistered. My jacket was torn. I looked like someone from this time now, dirty, frightened, barely holding together. The priest approached me again, studying my face as if trying to see something beneath it. "You arrived before the dead," he said slowly. "That has not happened before." I wanted to tell him I was no chosen figure, no savior. Just a man who touched the wrong object at the wrong moment. But when I opened my mouth, no explanation came that would make sense. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Where do they come from? The priest hesitated. Then he gestured toward the distant hills beyond the forest. "From the old battlefield," he said. "Where the earth was never properly blessed. Where too many died without names." Something cold settled in my chest. Battlefields. Mass graves. Trauma left unburied. Even in my own time, places like that carried weight. Memory. Fear. Standing there in the ruined church, I began to understand something unsettling. The undead were not random. They were bound to this land. And somehow, now, so was I. That night, As the survivors slept in shifts, I stared at the unfamiliar stars through a broken window and made a quiet decision. If this time had rules, if the dead rose for a reason, then the answer to going home might lie not in running from the past, but in facing what it refused to let go. And I had a feeling the next winter would be far worse. 3. Morning arrived without warmth. A pale sun pushed weakly through the clouds, casting a dull light over the settlement. Smoke still drifted from the remains of burned torches and shattered beams, mixing with the sharp scent of frost. The silence felt unnatural, as if the land itself was holding its breath after the violence of the night before. The villagers moved slowly, methodically, collecting broken weapons and covering the bodies of the fallen. No one cried loudly. Grief here was quiet, practiced, carried like a familiar burden. I helped where I could, lifting stones, carrying water from the well, holding a lantern while wounds were cleaned with shaking hands. Each small task anchored me to the present moment, keeping panic from taking hold again. Yet I felt the distance between us. Their glances lingered. Some were grateful. Others were wary. To them, I was an unknown variable in a world already filled with horrors. By midday, the priest called everyone to the open square. The church was too damaged to gather inside. People stood wrapped in cloaks, faces pale with exhaustion. An elderly woman stepped forward, leaning heavily on a wooden staff. Her voice was steady. "He is not of this land," she said, looking directly at me. "The earth does not recognize him." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Fear thickened the air. Before I could speak, Thomas moved to my side. "He fought," he said. "He stood when others fell." "That does not mean he belongs," someone replied. The priest raised his hands. "Enough. He came before the dead rose. That alone is reason to listen before we judge." The gathering dispersed, uneasy but unresolved. Later, the priest led me to a small stone archive built into the hillside. Inside, shelves sagged under the weight of old scrolls and leather-bound books. He showed me crude maps of the region, markings passed down through generations. At the edge of every map was the same symbol, a darkened area at the foot of the distant hills. "The battlefield," the priest said. "Thousands died there, buried quickly, improperly. The ground was never healed." "Why winter?" I asked. "When the soil hardens," he replied. "When warmth leaves the world. The dead remember." That night, sleep refused to come. The room was cold, the silence broken only by distant wind. My thoughts spiraled, about home, about electricity and safety and a future that suddenly felt unreal. I reached into my pocket without thinking. My fingers closed around cold metal. The astrolabe. It should not have been there. Yet it was. Its surface bore new scratches, its markings faintly luminous, as if reacting to the world around it. I turned it slowly, half expecting the room to vanish again. Nothing happened. But I knew, deeply, instinctively, that this object was the reason I was here. The following morning, I walked to the edge of the forest with Thomas. The trees grew twisted as we approached the hills, branches bent in unnatural directions. Snow lay uneven on the ground, melting in some places, untouched in others. "No one goes beyond this point," Thomas said. "Those who did never returned." I nodded. I didn't need persuasion. As we turned back, a low vibration rolled through the earth beneath our feet. Not sound, movement. Subtle, but unmistakable. That night, the sky darkened earlier than it should have. Wind howled through the settlement, extinguishing fires faster than they could be lit. From far away, beyond the hills, a distant moan echoed, long, layered, filled with restless memory. I stood alone near the damaged church, gripping the astrolabe as fear and understanding